The Brutally Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Starving Artist Brewing. Starving Artist Brewing may be a small speck on Michigan's beer map, but they say big things come in small packages. A brewery who really puts their money where their mouth is, supporting underground artists far and wide. Making delicious beers with the simple belief that you should judge beer, not people. Brutally Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Recoded.com. With over 500,000 officially licensed items in their online store, you're guaranteed to find something you need. Use our code BREWtally and get 10% off your total purchase order. Now on to the show.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard. And you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give
up. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Brutally Speaking podcast. I am your host, John, and this episode's guest is Dino from Fear Factory from Brujeria, probably still getting that wrong, Asesino, and so many other classic legendary bands. This was an opportunity I leapt at when it came across in my emails. While this is a lot less longer of a chat than you're probably used to hearing, it still is one of those where sometimes the opportunity is too good to pass up. Doing this podcast, I constantly talk about, the opportunities presented and how I'm just amazed at some of the people I've gotten to talk to, all from starting a show literally because I would watch other people do interviews with band people I thought that I could do better. And I'm not here to say that I have done better or that I've done worse than the people I've seen online, but I will definitely say that it is crazy that someone who is so tied to being a big part of how I got into metal and a lot of time spent with my friends listening to metal albums, in my youth. Fear Factory is one of them. I kind of told one of the stories in the chat of just being like jamming with friends, and a friend of ours, Joe, decided to get back into playing drums, wanted to hang out with everybody and jam. And I remember he was like, I'm going to learn stuff off of Demanufacture and Digimortal. And we were like, dude, go fuck yourself. Like, that's so hard. Like, no way you're just going to jump right back into playing drums and, like, just be there. And I swear that motherfucker within 2 weeks was pretty much there. Like, a lot of the rudiments of, like, what the hands need to do wasn't quite there, but the feet were. And I just remember being, like, hanging out with that dude all the time, Joe, that is, and just being like, God damn, you're good at everything. Like, instantly, like, never skateboarded, started skateboarding, already doing kickflips and fucking varials and all kinds of, like, flatland tricks and shit. And I was like, why are some people just so good? Why are you just so good at everything? And I'm mediocre at a lot of things at best. Shout out to Joe, though. But yeah, no, Fear Factory is one of those bands. I think they were a gateway band for so many people. I mean, I talk about it in the show of just kind of being at this part of my life where there was so much, I don't want to say extremes in metal, but there was so much pushing of the envelope in so many different ways. A band like Fear Factory coming out, kind of merging industrial, but we're heavier, way heavier than, I'll say like a Ministry. But we're still on par with some of the heaviest metal that was out there, or even heavier in some degrees. It just was an era of music for me and a time in music and metal for me where I was seeking the most fastest, extreme, heaviest thing there was. And at a time, Fear Factory was it. And then it became something else. And then it became something else. And it's weird that sort of, I don't know if that honestly was how everyone else felt, where we were just looking for the heaviest fucking thing ever. But it is interesting to look back and realize that as you get older, the thing that now I love about it is how much melody there was, how much emphasis on songwriting there was compared to some of the contemporaries that I was comparing them to, of not having the same songwriting chops. But also, we need to stop comparing bands because it doesn't fucking matter. Are you the heaviest band in the world? Okay, cool. I think, and I've said it all along, I think the biggest problem the metal rock community faces is that we're our own worst enemies. We want to build one up while tearing another down or tearing down an entire scene, the fan base itself. And I don't know, it was funny leading up to this chat, really thinking about the legacy of Fear Factory, the legacy of Dino, thinking about how his music has intertwined in my life and where I was at these different points of my life with some of these other records, in addition to just being like one of the guitar guys that like was pushing shit in a new way. Like, you know, a lot of people talk about the right hand, you know, the picking hand, or the left hand, and that's where a lot of tone comes from. And I'm here to say Dino was one of those people that it seemed impossible to be able to play what he was playing. Not only was his right hand so fucking fast and precise, mechanical-esque as it were, but also the tones just seemed unattainable. You know, that was always something that kind of put Dino in another level all on his own, is that he had a sound and it was his and no one could replicate it. Again, no pun intended. And it's one of those things where it's just wild to think of someone being able to maintain that level of credibility in a scene and ingenuity and just that level of musicianship for almost the entirety of everyone knowing who they are. So of course I wanted to have Dino on the podcast. All of that said, let's get into my chat with Dino. I'll talk to you all on the other side of it.
As long as everybody's still there, we're all good.
Absolutely. Then I already hit record and we're just going to kind of go. It's kind of funny. Happy release day of Recoded. Was actually finally listening to the full record because I did not get it beforehand. It's shocking to me that you're still able to, all these decades later, to still put out all these like these remix albums and stuff like that, where it's like, you know, you think of Fear Factory and it's like they're a fucking metal band, they're a crushingly heavy metal band, but then these like remixes and so forth remind you that it's like, man, there's so much melody, like vocally, and all this stuff that you guys are able to do and pull out of these songs and these remixes. And it just is, it's so wild to see how diverse the band still is all these decades later. How does it feel to, honestly, to just kind of keep expanding what the band is so far into the band's career?
Yeah, well, if you know that, you know, we've been doing it since way back since 1992 or 93 when Fear is the Mind Killer remix EP first came out, and we kind of like did it again in 1997. So it's been about 25 years since we've done it again, and one of the reasons why this came out is because, or the idea of it was because we were just sitting around during COVID. So I was like, let's just do a remix album. Well, first it kind of started out as like a remix EP, and I'm like, you know what? This needs to be a full-length album. Let's keep going with it. And it just expanded, just became this thing. And so I'm really glad that we got to do it. And you know, it's definitely like it's always been like another extension of who we are and the different types of music that we like. And I think that Fear Factory's music blends really well with this electronic, industrial, techno-y, GABA, hardcore type stuff, and you know, and it fits really. And on this record, for instance, there's a song. It's called "Worthless." It's like a synthwave track.
Synthwave, yep,
totally. And
yeah.
You know, also on this record, you know, like for instance, like the album "Aggression Continuum," there's a lot of brutal riffing in there, and just, you know, sometimes the vocals are not. The vocals are perfect, but then when you do the remix album, the vocals really stand out, and you're hearing more of it, and people are like, wow, you know, and it works out great.
It was funny because today, I'm sure you're familiar with the group Gunship. They just put out a new song with Power Glove, and it was interesting because like kind of how I started my morning was listening to that and then kind of listening to more of the synthwave stuff. So when I was kind of making my way through this Recoded album, I just actually had finished Worthless again because I was like, oh, I just really love how this song sounds. And I was like, I guess synthwave is kind of the vibe of today that I'm going for, I guess unofficially. But it was kind of it's interesting because it's like I feel like I've recently in the last year or so really kind of gone more into this synthwave kind of rabbit hole through other friends who are in metal bands, and they're like, dude, you should check this shit out. It's really fucking cool. Like, I know you have a love for like 80s kind of sounding stuff and like horror movies and soundtracks and scores and stuff like that. So I think you'd like this style of music. But it's interesting, when Worthless came on, I was like, I don't know that I ever would have thought of a synthwave Fear Factory song, but fuck, it works. And now I want more of that in Fear Factory. And then,
Yeah.
you know, I feel like when you do some of these remixes and see what people do to the songs and so forth, does it really ever translate into inspiring you to write something new because of maybe a melody idea that they've repurposed or found or something?
I think that, you know, a good majority of our fans are really open to this, and I thank them for that. But there are a handful of fans that are like, nah, we want some brutal shit. We want heavy stuff. So maybe, you know, touching a little bit on it in a song or something like that, yeah, maybe it would work really well. But, you know, I think a whole record like that, you know, I don't know. I mean, maybe, you know, it would do well, but maybe not. I think that most of our fans want to hear the metal. They want to hear the riffs. They want to hear the heavy vocals. They want to hear all that stuff. You know what I mean? So, but when we were working on that track, Worthless, that's Zardonic, and I was telling him, look, it's not necessarily his forte to do that type of music, but I asked him, hey, you know, can you work on this and do this style? And he's like, well, give me a little bit. I'm going to experiment and I'm going to try some different elements. And that's what he did. And he just nailed it. And I said, that's it. And then we worked on the structure together and all that stuff. You know, I got to work with these artists, and it's always fun when you work with different artists and see how they interpret your music, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
what they could bring and how they could change things. And you know, of course, Reese Fulber has been working with the band since way back in '92. He did the first you know, remix EP that we did called Fear's the Mind Killer that was out in '93. He mixed Demanufacture and remixed Remanufacture album, which was killer. He also, you know, produced and mixed Obsolete, produced and mixed DG Mortal. And then when I was out of the band, I don't believe he was involved in the band with that much. Then when I came back in 2009, 2010, Mechanized release, and I brought Reese back to do production. And so he's been involved with the band for a long time. So,
Absolutely.
you know, working with him is always a treat. It's always amazing. And he's definitely, you know, expanded his thing that he does too. He's doing full DJ, he's doing live hardware DJ. I don't know if you know what that is, where these guys bring their hardware
Right.
and they
Yep.
just make up stuff on the fly. You know what I mean? That's really, really cool stuff. And that's like a lost art that people don't do anymore. A lot of guys just press a computer and they go. You know what I mean? Yeah. So working with him is always killer. Rob G is another guy. He's really into the hardcore Gabba scene, which is mainly based out of Holland. But he lives here in New York, and I've known him for some time, and working with him was killer. Tyrant of Death guy based out of Toronto, a guy named Alex. He's killer. He did the Collapse remix that came out heavy as hell, very heavy industrial, fucking amazing. There's another artist that is not on this record, but it's only on the vinyl. They're called Turbo Slash.
Yeah.
And
Okay. So that
yeah,
the
they're also
press
another
release.
synth wave as well, and that's really cool. And
How-
Blush Response is like more. He did the title track Recoded, and that's more dark, kind of dark German vibe, a hardcore, you know, industrial.
With the expansiveness of the people you're working with on this, how do you find them, or how do you go about finding the people to work with on something like this?
Zardonic, I've been a fan of for a while. He put out a couple of records where it was like drum and bass, mixed with guitars and stuff like that. And so I was really into that. That was really cool. He put that out probably like 5 or 6 years ago. He put a record out and it was killer. He put a couple of records out that were killer. And then so I reached out to and I contacted Rob G. Like I said, I knew him for a while. He was a friend of my manager's. So that one was pretty easy. Reese Fulber, of course. All I gotta do is send him a text. And then Turbo Factory, I reached out to, but Blush Response, he's been working with the band, doing stuff here and there since I want to say since 2011, 2012, around there. He's been involved with the band. So, yeah, it's been killer.
It just makes me wonder, what does your record collection look like with the different stuff and influences you're bringing in? Because I feel like, I tend to find that, yes, while a lot of us do love metal, we love, hard, heavy riffs and breakdowns and all that kind of stuff. I tend to find a lot of times you'd be surprised at how much of the not of that genre that people listen to. And it sounds, it's always been one of those things to me where obviously, you guys get classified as an industrial metal band. So a lot of times it's like, I think people just would think that that's the two genres you're listening to the most. But I would kind of be interested to find out what you actually are listening to, because I feel like for some reason, I feel like you listen to a lot of instrumental stuff, if I had to guess.
I just listen to a lot of music in general. When I was a kid, growing up, my household, I had I had 3 brothers and 4 sisters, and everybody was older than me. So everybody was listening to different music. So when I was like, the minute I was born, I was listening to different types of stuff. My dad, obviously I'm of Mexican descent. My father was listening to mariachi music. My mother was into the classic oldies like Beatles and Neil Sedaka, things like that, Sam Cooke. But you had my other sisters, and brothers who liked different music, some early metal, early punk, early, AC/DC was the band that I really gravitated towards too. So I always got a smorgasbord of music. One of my sisters liked Elton John and Pink Floyd. My other sister was like into Ted Nugent and like Van Halen and stuff. So I got into all of it. You know what I mean? So, and that still pretty much carries forward till today of just all the different types of stuff I listen to. But I'm a really big fan of a lot of stuff that was in the 80s of when I was growing up. Being here, whether it's new wave, whether it's hair metal, whether it's thrash metal, speed metal, classic heavy metal, rock, just all into that stuff.
It's funny. A friend of mine always gives me shit for liking things that sound good, like from a production standpoint. And I go, you kind of got to remember, I grew up in the 80s where like even like everything had kind of a pop sheen to it. Like our popular music was so far and wide as far as like your Motley Crues and your metals and so forth. It was pop sounding metal. And I was like, even pop was pop, rap was pop was like, R&B sounded very poppy. I was like, so that's why I think I've just have a more natural inclination to stuff that sounds good. And I know that sometimes that is the thing that draws people in. It's like, oh, this, like, you can feel the raw emotion because it's not overproduced and it's not this. And I'm just like, couldn't you have spent a little bit more money making it sound a little bit better for me? Because like, I don't know, it's almost like a badge of honor to be like, we recorded it with one microphone in the middle of a concrete basement. Doesn't it sound awesome? And you're like, no, all I hear is snares and cymbals.
Yeah, it's like those black metal records that just sound really like they record it with a ghetto blaster or something like that.
I was talking to someone yesterday about like, because one of the segments I've started doing is that, and I'll ask you this at the end, so think about it now. Favorite merch. And he was like, I love Dimmu. Like I have a shirt that's like one of my favorites. And I was like, I fucking love that band. But I'm also like, it's funny to me that everyone kind of slags on that band because they're like, well, everyone likes it because they're just like the fucking easy band to like from that genre because they sound good. And I'm like, yeah, and everyone else should sound good too because it can be done.
Yeah, of course. But Fear Factory, we've always put a lot into our production, and we've always been into it. Back when we were doing Soul of a New Machine, that was basically the birth of the band, and we were just still trying to find our way. But it wasn't until we did Demanufacturers where, during the recording, just before we went into mixing, I ended up firing the producer because I just didn't think I felt that at that time he wasn't forward thinking enough. And Reese had already been working with the band, and I ended up hiring Reese and a guy named Greg Greeley to mix, manufacture. And ever since then, we've really put a lot into our production. And so at whatever cost it took, we just wanted it to make it sound amazing.
Well, I think that's something that's always stood out. Like, I mean, it's funny, you're kind of forever tied, and I don't know if people still do this. I would imagine they do, but you were forever tied to kind of this era of like in search of the heaviest thing ever. And it's funny to remember like sitting in a room with some friends jamming, and someone's like, "Dude, have you heard this like new Fear Factory record?" And it's like, "No." And then just the fucking blast beats and shit, and you're just like, How? Like, how is it that fucking tight and it sounds that good? Like, this is the heaviest thing I've ever heard." And then it's like, okay, like fast forward, and then it's like Slipknot. Jesus Christ, this is the craziest fat like thing I've ever heard. And it's like, I don't know that like, and then Meshuggah. And it's like you have these bands when we were growing up, for me, that it's just wild to think about. Like, I was in pursuit of the heaviest thing I could ever find. And now it's like you have bands, thankfully with 7, 8 string, 9 string guitars and stuff like that, and the tunings that you can now have and the production clarity to get those tones. It's crazy to see like bands that are just like heavier, but I'm like, yeah, it's heavy, but like, I don't know. It doesn't hit me the same way because I don't think the songwriting is necessarily there. I feel like bands are now just heavy for the sake of being heavy, but they don't have the songwriting chops behind it to make it more impactful and more like time lasting, which isn't really a saying, but. Today's Beer Minute is brought to you by Starving Artist Brewery, who share a simple belief: you should judge beer and not people. Today's beer is Lead Dog Brewing out of Sparks, Nevada. It's their Patriotic Haze, and coming in at 7.5%, this New England-style IPA hints at tropical notes of pineapple, banana, and melon, and also drinks like any good IPA should. This one was definitely a reminder of the nice summer days that we have had as we approach fall and winter time. So thanks to Starving Artist Brewing, who remind you to support your starving artists, and please, always drink responsibly. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, well, we've always been into melodic. I've always been into melodic music, a lot of melodic elements, and we always, really try to incorporate all that stuff. We when Fear Factory first came out during Soul of a New Machine, we were like industrial metal, grindcore, death metal, sound, but we also threw those melodic vocals in there that really kind of like threw people off in the beginning because there was not really a lot of things going on like that at that time. And so when they heard us, we're like, what the fuck is this? Good and bad, good and bad. But then when we did the first remix record or EP called Fear is the Mind Killer, and then listening to our heavier industrial death metal elements put into techno, people were like, what the fuck is this shit? You know what I mean?
Well, it's funny to think back to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it was just like, it's just funny that, sometimes you just got to be the guinea pig, the archetype, the thing that kind of like puts this all together and makes it okay for other bands to do.
Yeah, it's also kind of interesting to remember, and I wasn't really of the age to go to these when they were super popular and prevalent, but I do remember them, and they still sort of exist, but it's like, it's interesting to remember that an avenue for you guys to kind of grow your band was kind of like these industrial clubs and so forth, where people would go and listen to, like Skinny Puppy and like you guys and a lot of other Bauhaus and a lot of other goth industrial different stuff. And it's weird to think that that's an avenue that doesn't really exist anymore, for at least I would say here in the States. I think they still have a pretty decent scene overseas, but it's interesting to remember people going and listening to a lot of, bands of that scene. And that was kind of how word of mouth spread for a lot of that music.
It's happening in LA. There's a lot of clubs here in LA that have that. They play that.
Okay.
They have DJs, they have different bands. It's still here. It's still going on here. A lot of the goths,
the Midwest, not so much.
yeah. It's still pretty big here, to be honest with you. It's happening. Is it maybe it's underground big, but it's big. You know what I mean?
Do you still? I would assume it sounds like you sort of do. Do you still go frequent things like that and kind of be immersed in that part of the scene and culture?
Of course.
Awesome.
Yes.
It's always interesting because I feel like having befriended a lot of different bands and musicians and people, it seems like after they've been around for as long, shit, not even nearly as long as you have been, that they just get burned out on a lot of stuff and they kind of become less fans of the things because they're just like, this is work, this
No,
is whatever, and they
no.
kind of lose that. And I feel like
Yeah.
it's
Not for me.
weird to it's weird to hear that people go through that, but I also love when people don't because I feel like it shines through in the music, and I think it shines through in what they do because they're still a fan of the thing and they're still passionate
Correct.
about it.
Correct. I always feel I always when I hear somebody say, "Yeah, well, I used to be in the metal when I was in high school." It's like, what? I mean, for me, it's like it's been since I was 9 years old. You know what I mean? And I haven't changed. You know what I mean? And I still go to shows very frequently. Whenever I'm home, I go to different concerts of different types of music, whether it's industrial to goth clubs or this, seeing goth bands, seeing DJs, you know, going to all the grindcore death metal shows. I go to all of it. I love it all, and I love seeing live music, and I love people. I love different artists, and I'm still very much involved into the music scene here in Los Angeles.
It's interesting. I had this epiphany the other day, going to go see Bring Me the Horizon and Knock Loose. And I wasn't really sure if Knock Loose's hardcore aesthetic of like, going to the show, if it come across and be able to translate when you go to see it in a shed. And it
Right.
does, at least because I was in the pit area. So it's like it felt that way. I can't speak to what it was like being on the lawn and being, that far away from it. But
Yeah.
it was interesting having this thought of, going to so many different kinds of shows like I do, rap and hip hop and pop and everything in between, that I was like, there's something universally unique about going to a metal or hardcore show where it's such a cathartic release. Like, when a band has that lyric, the shirt worthy lyric, the call and response type thing, and just the cathartic release of an evening at being at a metal show, it's unlike anything else. And it's really weird because I don't get the same entertainment value necessarily as I do when I go see like a pop artist where it's like this is a show and I'm being entertained, and it's usually an arena full of people. It's not the same. It's not the same, and it's the only place you can get it. But I also don't know if that's why it's so limiting to some people where they grow out of it because it's like maybe they don't think they need that release anymore.
Yeah. That's too bad for them. But you mentioned hip hop. I stopped seeing a lot of hip hop stuff because it's just somebody's going to get shot out here every time there's a hip hop show. Somebody gets
for
shot
for your maybe in your area, yes.
in
Mine,
Los
it's
Angeles. Yeah.
I was gonna say it's usually an exercise in, I've made the joke with some friends. I was like, I wish I loved anything as much as hip hop artists love being late to their own shows. Like I think the last time I saw Bone Thugs, they were almost 2 hours late. And I was like, Jesus Christ, dude! Like everyone's smoked out. No one can even function at this point by the time you're coming out.
Yeah, everybody's high and wasted. It's like, oh, it's kind
Yeah,
of like going to an old Guns N' Roses concert back in the day when Axl Rose wouldn't come out.
yeah, yeah. Except for I don't think it. Well, I was gonna say I don't think anyone could riot after smoking that much weed that is usually around. And even if you weren't smoking, the contact high alone,
Somebody told me
usually.
one time. Somebody told me one time, like Wu-Tang played L.A. and like I guess Old Dirty Bastard was, I guess, didn't want to come out of the bus because maybe I think he thought he was going to get shot. So
Mm.
he actually was on headphones and he pretty much did his verses from the bus on the wireless microphone.
Oh man, I'm trying to remember. Someone did something similar. I forget who it was. I think it was a metal band, and the guitar player had some like a panic attack or something, and played in the bathroom of like right next to where the band's stage was, and he had like obviously all the inner monitors and stuff, so he could hear everybody. But it was wild to see like they came up with a solution where he can go play and he can still hear everything, but he's not on stage playing with his band. And
They ought to just put like a little tent, a little cover for him, or he can play
yeah.
behind the backdrop or something on
Yeah,
stage.
it was wild, but it's interesting to hear that ODB kind of did the same thing, and with probably lack of
Well, for
technology
him,
back
for
then.
him was like for him was because he didn't want to get shot.
Yeah. Oh man, RIP ODB. No one will ever be like him.
Yes.
Um, who I'm trying to remember off the top of my head because I was actually just talking with someone yesterday for the podcast about the Judgment Night soundtrack, and how that
Great
brought a
soundtrack.
lot of
Great
great
soundtrack.
soundtrack, and how it merged, a lot of great hip hop and metal people.
Well, you had House of Pain and Helmet, one of my favorite songs. You're just another victim, kid. You're just
What was
another
to say? What was it?
victim.
Onyx and Biohazard.
Onyx and Biohazard was another one too. Judgment Night.
Yep.
Yeah. And then
I feel like
Booyah Tribe and Faith No More.
Yeah.
Slayer and Ice-T. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff on that.
I feel like we're kind of maybe poised for another crossover record like that. Like someone, and I feel like you of all people would probably be the one to take the reins and make something like
Me?
that happen. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah. I mean,
I
we're
don't
literally,
know.
I mean, you just put out a remix record and you're talking about all these different types of artists that you're working with to bring out a different side of your own band. So I feel like as an adventurous person who is into exploring all different facets of your own music, I feel like you could help be the bridge between other artists, between the heavy realm and, hip hop and all that kind of stuff.
Well, for me personally, I think hip hop and metal and hip hop and rock is, to me, it's kind of played out already. I probably wouldn't work on anything like that, but something else, yeah, for sure.
You don't see the potential of another like Judgment Night type thing happening where it kind of bridges the gap again and is actually really good instead of just being kind of hokey.
Well, I guess we would have to hear it and find out. But to me, it's like rap rock is kind of not anything I'm really into at the moment.
Fair enough.
But I do like the classic stuff, like that LP you're talking about, that soundtrack for sure. I'm into that. Some great songs on that. But go ahead.
I was gonna say, speaking of collaborations, kind of the other reason I was thinking about that. What was it, 20 years ago? We just celebrated the Roadrunner United.
Yes.
Man,
that was killer. That was an amazing thing to do.
Can you kind of share maybe some memories of the recording of the album and the live events?
My team was kind of the guinea pigs because, Monty Connor, who was the A&R guy at Roadrunner at that time, reached out to me and said, "Look, I have an idea. What do you think about it?" And he goes, you can get in there. You could be the team captain, and you can pick whoever you want to pick to be on the record. And I'm like, on your songs. And I said, okay. So I started picking guys. Of course, Andreas Kisser, Paul Gray, rest in peace, from Slipknot, was on the record, was on my songs. Roy Mayorga. So I brought, at that time, Roy was not even playing drums. He was pretty much retired from drums. I said, "Come on, man, you gotta come back. You gotta work on this thing with me." And so we did, and we ended up writing a few songs, and it was great to collaborate with all those different artists and musicians. It's not anything new for me because I've done that with my other bands, a band called Brujeria that I was a part of for many years. We always had different collaborators, guys from Faith No More, Napalm Death, Terrorizer, you name it, all these different artists, and we brought them all in to work on these, to collaborate with us on these songs and all these albums, and it was amazing. So to me, it was nothing new, but doing the Roadrunner United was killer as well, just to be able to put all these artists that are my friends together and to write these songs. It was a hell of fun.
Man, I remember, speaking of the Brujeria, I'm probably mispronouncing it because I don't have.
You could put it BREW, like your brutality.
Brujeria.
Brujeria.
Sorry, it's the lack of and that was why I failed Spanish, because I can't roll my R's or do anything.
Well, the correct way to say is brujeria.
Brujeria.
Yeah, the J is like an H. Heria.
Okay.
Heria.
All right. Well, there's my Spanish lesson for the day. But it was one of those things. I would remember a coworker of mine at a screen printing shop we were working at was wearing the shirt from like it was the first album with the head. And I was like,
yep.
Yeah, and I was like, dude, what a fucking, I was like, is that a boot or is that legit? He goes, it's legit. He goes, but yeah, it took me a while to track this down because a lot of people don't like this artwork, and it's really hard to find because people don't want to like obviously post it online and sell it and all that kind of stuff. So
but yeah, now it's no big deal. People buy it all the time. But yeah, going back to 1990, what year was that? 92 as well. The first record, Matando Güeros. When the record company Roadrunner Records was manufacturing the CD, they had it manufactured in this place. I guess it was in New York, but the people who were making the actual CDs and packaging them were actually were Hispanic, and they were working in these factories making the CD, and they were like totally scared of this CD. One, Brujeria in Spanish means black magic. Then they see a guy's head cut off on the album cover. They're like, what the fuck is this shit? So they were actually, they didn't want to touch it at first, but then they were packing the CDs in boxes, and inside the boxes they were writing biblical scriptures, like blessing the box.
That's awesome.
And the same thing happened when they were making the t-shirts as well.
That's interesting to like these like weird little like side stories that are a part of your legacy and your career at this point, that are just a time in an era that I don't think could ever be recaptured or at all.
Yeah. So I believe it's that time that I got to get going.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to say thank you very much for giving me this platform. Thank you to everybody who is been supporting the band since way back in 1992, since our first album. And check out our new remix album called Recoded. It is out now, so please go check it out.
Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully see you on the road soonish.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yep. Have a good time.
Later.
So that was my conversation with Dino. Again, the new Fear Factory record, Recoded, is out already. It was out the day of the release, as of when we did this conversation. It's really interesting to look at a band that has had a career decades long and are still able to throw longtime fans curveballs, still kind of able to reintroduce who they are to us. And I think this Recoded record really does that. I mean, we talked about one of the songs on the record having more of a synthwave kind of thing. And I know synthwave isn't really new as far as a genre or a style, but it's gaining more popularity in the last couple of years with, different bands like Gunship and some other groups. And it becomes this thing where Fear Factory being able to tap into these different elements of electronic music as they are growing in popularity, or even sometimes in some instances, it's not that they're a super popular genre or gaining popularity, but Fear Factory can maybe put the spotlight on it for other fans who may not know those genres exist. And to me, that is what will keep this band around for as long as they want to be around, because they're able to tap into so many different things and be relevant and honestly, more to a point, be pioneers of showcasing different things to different people who are, as I sort of said in the intro, kind of a bit closed-minded and our own worst enemies with things. So sometimes when things like this happen, some people might go, oh, I'd rather have new material. Who needs a remix album? But to me, when it's done this fucking good, it's not even really a remix album. It basically is a new album with elements that you know. And to me, that's almost what a band would do with a new record. It takes what you know about them, but kind of pushes where they've been and where they want to go in new directions. And I feel like that's honestly what Recoded is doing for them. Yes, it has songs and parts that you know, but it's pushing them into new territories that maybe you wouldn't expect the band to go into, and kind of experimenting with the sound. And to me, that's always been the refreshing thing about Fear Factory, is just their willingness to try and be daring in a scene where a lot of people get stagnant very quickly, especially so far into the career. Hearing how Dino grew up, with 7 siblings and just the diversity of music that he was influenced by, I mean, honestly, that doesn't surprise me. But it is one of those that I think is interesting to learn where these influences came from. And, also being able to reflect on, 20 years of Roadrunner United. And honestly, I didn't know he was the guinea pig for that project to be started. But, it just celebrated the 20th anniversary a couple of weeks ago as of when I'm recording this. And the timing of chatting with him couldn't have been more on brand for that to talk about. And, I just feel like at times the scene is very limiting of itself, and some of the things that Dino has done in his career really showcases, I think, what could be with a scene if it was more open to experiment, open to working with new people and just creating new things. That Roadrunner United thing I thought was a great idea, and I'm honestly surprised more labels haven't done something similar, where it showcases what the legacy of the label has, as well as showcasing the new talent that is on the roster, and creating new music, as well as just celebrating everything that is your catalog under the umbrella of the label. It's something I don't know, maybe it's just going to be a once in a lifetime thing and that no one else will ever do. And that's why it's special. But it is one of those things that it was really cool to kind of reminisce about that. And the, you know, the kind of funny things around the Brujeria album cover and how people were writing, you know, scripture passages in the boxes, you know, and all that kind of stuff. It's wild. It's a wild time that Dino grew up playing in, myself growing up as a fan during these times. I know sometimes it's hard for people who didn't grow up in these eras to understand just how different things were back then, but fucking wild. But crazy to have Dino on the podcast. Very much appreciative. If you would like to keep up with Fear Factory, you can find them simple enough, Fear Factory, on all of your socials. You can go to fearfactory.com, keep up with everything going on with the band, pick up the new record. The vinyl looks really great. The packaging looks great. And we have a new Fear Factory record on the way as well early next year. I guess we're going to find out who the new vocalist is soon enough. And interested to see how that goes. If you would like to keep up with Dino, you can find him at Dino Cazares on Facebook. Nope. And if you would like to keep up with the podcast, it's simple enough. Brew Speak Pod on all of your social media platforms. If you would like to support us monetarily, you can go to patreon.com/BrewSpeakPod. All the episodes live up over there well before they come out on the normal feed. We have about 8 to 10 episodes that'll never appear on this feed. Lots of bonus content. And honestly, it just supports the show. So your support means a lot to me. If you would like to get in touch with me, future guest ideas, whatever it is, maybe carry on a conversation from an episode, you can email me at brutallyspeaking@gmail.com. And we'd like to thank our sponsors once again, rockabilia.com. I didn't get to ask Dino what his favorite piece of merch was, but you can go over to Rockabilia and pick up some Fear Factory merch. Want to thank Starving Artist Brewery for all of their support. Can't wait to get into some more stuff with them in the near future. And for the Brutally Speaking podcast, I am John, and I'll talk to you all next time, where the guest is Tucker Rule from Thursday and LS Dunes. That was another brief but really, really good chat. Can't wait to get into that one with you, and I'll talk to you then.